Say twins share everything, but my brother Adrian always took a little more than his fair share. We look identical, down to the last freckle on our left cheekbones. But while I spent my life in a laboratory developing the molecular scents and flavors that make luxury food taste like a dream, Adrian spent his life in front of mirrors perfecting his smile. When he stole my latest formula for a $15 million signature fragrance and used our identical faces to hijack my career as a master perfumer, he told me that the world wants a star, not a nerd. I didn't fight him. I didn't even call our parents to complain. I just let him walk onto the world stage as the genius twin. What he didn't realize was that I had built a self-destruct timer into the scent profile, and the clock was already ticking down to zero. My name is Cameron Webb, and I'm a flavorist and fragrance chemist. Most people don't even know this job exists, but someone has to create the scents that make expensive perfumes smell like heaven and luxury foods taste like they're worth their ridiculous prices. I live in a world of glass beakers, precision scales, and sensory perception testing. My laboratory is my sanctuary, a clean white space filled with hundreds of tiny bottles containing essences extracted from flowers, fruits, woods, and things most people have never heard of. I drive a matte black Mercedes SUV, heavy and powerful but completely silent when it moves. It fits my life perfectly. Solid, reliable, and understated in a way that doesn't attract attention. Adrian, however, was a failed actor who'd spent the last 10 years bouncing between auditions, landing minor roles in commercials that nobody remembered, and slowly watching his dreams crumble into dust. He was talented at performing, at making people like him, at commanding attention when he walked into a room. But talent wasn't enough in an industry filled with talented people. He needed something special, something unique that would make him stand out from the crowd. That's when he realized he could use my reputation to rebrand himself as a culinary visionary, a celebrity chef with scientific knowledge that nobody else possessed. He saw my success and decided it should be his instead. Our parents are completely neutral people, the kind who love both their children equally and refuse to take sides in any conflict. They aren't technical or scientific. Dad runs a small hardware store, and Mom teaches elementary school. To them, we were just two successful sons doing impressive things they didn't fully understand. One who worked in a lab doing something with smells, and one who was trying to make it in entertainment. There was no golden child in our family, no favorite son who could do no wrong. Just a deep confusion about what I actually did for a living, and a proud support for whatever Adrian was attempting at any given moment. I had just finished developing Aura 9, a synthetic compound that perfectly mimics the scent of the rarest truffle in the world. Real specimens of this particular truffle sell for thousands of dollars per ounce, found only in a specific region of northern Italy during 3 weeks of the year. Creating a synthetic version that was chemically identical took me 3 years of research, hundreds of failed attempts, and knowledge of organic chemistry that very few people in the world possessed. The potential value was enormous. Luxury restaurants could use it. High-end food companies would pay millions for the formula. Perfume houses would line up to incorporate it into their signature scents. Adrian and I owned a vacation house together in the mountains, a small cabin we'd bought jointly 5 years ago as an investment and a place to escape the city. We'd split the cost down the middle and agreed to share it equally. I used it maybe twice a year, usually when I needed absolute quiet to think through a complex problem. Adrian used it more often, bringing friends up for weekend parties. I'd left my research notes there during my last visit, locked in the study along with the final prototype of Aura 9. It was a small glass bottle containing about 50 milliliters of clear liquid that smelled like absolute perfection. I thought it was safe there. I was wrong. Adrian found the prototype and the research notes during one of his weekend trips. I don't know if he was snooping or if he just stumbled across them, but either way, he understood immediately what he was looking at. He might not know chemistry, but he could read the market value projections I'd written in my notes. $15 million in potential contracts. global luxury brands already expressing interest, a breakthrough that would change the industry. He didn't just steal the bottle and walk away. He stole something bigger. He stepped into my life and took my identity along with my formula. Adrian flew to Paris 2 weeks later. He used my credentials, my reputation, my portfolio of previous work. He contacted the luxury house that had been courting me for months, trying to secure exclusive rights to Aura 9. Because we are identical twins, because our faces are perfectly matched, because he'd studied my mannerisms and copied my professional style, nobody questioned him for a second. He walked into their headquarters, presented the formula as his own creation, and signed a multi-million-dollar deal to launch what he called Adrian's Essence. He did interviews with food magazines and chemistry journals. He took credit for years of my research. He smiled for cameras and accepted praise for genius he didn't possess. I found out about it 3 days after he signed the contract. A colleague called me, confused, saying she'd seen my interview in a French culinary magazine, but I looked different somehow, more animated and less technical in my explanations. I pulled up the article online and felt my stomach drop. There was Adrian, wearing my face, sitting in the office I was supposed to be sitting in, talking about my journey developing this revolutionary compound. He'd even copied the way I gesture with my hands when explaining complex concepts. It was like watching a mirror image of myself living a life I should have been living. I called him immediately, my hands shaking with anger. He answered on the first ring, sounding cheerful and proud. "Cameron, did you see the press? Isn't it amazing? The world loves me. Our parents are so incredibly proud. Mom called crying happy tears." I tried to speak, but he kept going. "Look, if you out me now, you'll just look like a jealous brother trying to ruin the family's biggest win. Nobody wants to hear about laboratory drama. Just stay in your lab and keep making the magic. I'll handle the fame and the public appearances. We can split the money. Think of it as a partnership." His voice was calm, reasonable, like he was proposing something perfectly sensible instead of confessing to identity theft. I didn't out him. I didn't call the luxury house or contact lawyers or send angry emails to journalists. I didn't need to do any of those things because Adrian had made one critical mistake. He'd assumed Aura 9 was a finished product, ready for market, completely stable and safe to use. It wasn't. See, Aura 9 was what we call a chameleon compound in the fragrance chemistry world. In its base stable state, when stored properly in controlled conditions, it smells absolutely divine. But I had engineered it to be highly sensitive to a very specific and common chemical compound. I'd built in a failsafe, a self-destruct mechanism that would activate under certain conditions. The trigger was caffeine, more specifically the vapor compounds released by hot coffee. When Aura 9 is exposed to even trace amounts of coffee vapor, the kind found at every high-end gala, press conference, restaurant, and corporate office in the world, it undergoes a rapid oxidation process. The molecular structure flips, the chemical bonds rearrange, and the scent transforms completely. It doesn't just stop smelling good. It doesn't just become neutral or fade away. It turns into a scent that chemically mimics rotting sulfur mixed with decomposing organic matter. Basically, it starts smelling like death itself had taken a bath in sewage. I'd built this failsafe into Aura 9 deliberately, not because I expected my own brother to steal it, but because I never released anything into the world without a kill switch. It was my standard practice, my insurance policy against theft or misuse. Any fragrance compound I created had a built-in vulnerability that only I knew about, a way to neutralize it or destroy it if necessary. In the case of Aura 9, the caffeine trigger was perfect. It was specific enough that the compound would remain stable under normal storage conditions, but common enough that it would inevitably encounter the trigger in any real-world luxury setting. Adrian had no idea what he'd actually stolen. The global launch event was scheduled for 6 weeks after Adrian signed the contract. It was being held at the Louvre in Paris, in the same grand hall where they display ancient Egyptian artifacts and priceless artwork. The luxury house had spared no expense. They'd invited 300 of the most influential people in fashion, food, and fragrance. Celebrity chefs, famous perfumers, wealthy collectors, journalists from every major publication. The event was designed to be the most expensive and prestigious product launch of the year. My parents received special invitations, flown first class to Paris, and put up in a five-star hotel. They called me excitedly, asking if I was coming to support my brother. I told them I wouldn't miss it for the world. I booked my own flight, my own hotel room, and began preparing exactly what I'd need for the evening. I packed a small briefcase with a neutralizing spray I developed specifically for Aura 9, along with detailed technical documentation about the compound's actual properties. I also packed my own credentials, my research portfolio, and legal documents proving I was the original creator. I wasn't planning to make a scene or cause drama. I was simply going to let chemistry do what chemistry does best, follow its natural laws without emotion or bias. The night of the launch arrived with perfect weather. Clear skies, comfortable temperature, the kind of evening that makes Paris look like a painting. I arrived at the Louvre early, wearing a suit identical to what Adrian would probably wear. We'd always had similar taste in formal clothing, another side effect of being identical twins. I walked through security without any issues, found my seat in the back of the hall, and watched as the room filled with wealthy, important people. Everyone was dressed in designer clothes, dripping with jewelry, talking in that particular way rich people have where they name drop constantly, without seeming to realize they're doing it. My parents arrived looking nervous and proud at the same time. Mom wore a dress she'd clearly bought specially for the occasion, something elegant but not quite fitting the ultra-luxury crowd around her. Dad kept adjusting his tie and looking around like he couldn't believe he was actually in the Louvre. They spotted me and came over confused. "Cameron, we thought you said you weren't coming. Why are you sitting back here?" I smiled and hugged them both. I wanted to surprise Adrian. I wouldn't miss his big moment. They seemed satisfied with that answer and went to find their assigned seats near the front, in the section reserved for family and special guests. Adrian took the stage at exactly 8 o'clock, looking confident and polished in an expensive designer suit that probably cost more than I spent on rent for 6 months. He stood behind a podium next to an enormous display bottle of Aura 9, backlit and glowing like some kind of holy relic. He was holding a microphone, smiling that perfect smile he'd practiced for years of auditions. He looked every bit the genius that I actually was. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying through the hall with practiced ease. "Tonight, I present to you the culmination of years of research, the scent of the century, a breakthrough in molecular chemistry that will revolutionize the world of luxury fragrance and cuisine." The audience applauded politely. Adrian launched into a presentation that was maybe 30% accurate science and 70% charming nonsense. He threw around chemistry terms he clearly didn't understand, made vague references to molecular reconstruction and sensory optimization that sounded impressive to people who didn't know any better. The luxury house executives sat in the front row, nodding approvingly. They'd invested $15 million in this launch. They'd staked their reputation on Adrian's genius. They believed every word he was saying because they wanted to believe it, because the alternative was admitting they'd made a catastrophic mistake. As Adrian's presentation wrapped up, the catering staff began their planned service. Waiters in white gloves emerged from the wings carrying silver trays. On each tray sat dozens of tiny cups of espresso, perfectly brewed, still steaming hot. This was part of the luxury house's vision, pairing the unveiling of Aura 9 with a coffee service that would complement the truffle notes. They'd planned it as an elegant touch, a way to engage multiple senses at once. The waiters circulated through the room, offering espresso to the guests. Within 2 minutes, about 100 cups of hot coffee were creating a gentle cloud of vapor that rose toward the ceiling and began spreading through the air. I watched Adrian's face carefully, waiting for the exact moment when he'd realize something was wrong. It started subtly. A few people in the front row wrinkled their noses, looking around confused. Then more people began to notice, their expressions changing from polite interest to discomfort to barely concealed disgust. The scent of Aura 9 was transforming, the molecules flipping in response to the caffeine vapor, the beautiful truffle aroma turning into something absolutely horrible. Within seconds, the entire hall smelled like a combination of rotten eggs, decomposing garbage, and sulfur. People started covering their noses with napkins and handkerchiefs. Some of the guests began standing up, looking for exits. Adrian's confident expression crumbled into confusion, then panic. He looked around wildly, trying to figure out what was happening. The CEO of the luxury house stood up from his seat in the front row, his face red with anger and embarrassment. "What is this?" he shouted at Adrian. "What's happening to the scent?" Adrian tried to speak into the microphone, his voice shaking. There must be a ventilation issue, something wrong with the air conditioning. This isn't supposed to happen." But the smell was clearly coming from the display bottles on stage, from the samples that had been distributed to tables around the room, from Adrian himself who'd applied the fragrance before going on stage. I stood up from my seat in the back and walked calmly down the center aisle. I was the only person in the room who didn't smell like rotting sulfur because I hadn't applied any Aura 9, and I'd positioned myself away from the display bottles. I smelled perfectly normal, like the sandalwood and cedar cologne I'd worn instead. Every head turned to watch me approach the stage. The resemblance between Adrian and me caused a wave of confused whispers. I reached the podium and pulled a small spray bottle from my jacket pocket. "The chemistry is quite complex," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear, my voice calm and professional. "It takes years of study to understand how these molecules react to environmental factors." I sprayed the neutralizing agent into the air around the display bottles. The chemical reaction was immediate. The horrible smell began to fade, replaced by clean air. I turned to face the audience, then looked at Adrian, who stood frozen beside me. My brother Adrian is a wonderful performer, an excellent face for any brand, but perhaps the actual science was a bit out of his depth. I pulled out my credentials, my research documentation, and handed them to the CEO who had climbed onto the stage. "I'm Cameron Webb, the actual creator of Aura 9. I can explain exactly why this happened and how to prevent it, because I designed every molecule of this compound over 3 years of research." Adrian wasn't sued for theft, though he could have been. Instead, he was sued for incompetence and misrepresentation. The luxury house canceled the $15 million contract immediately because Adrian couldn't explain or fix the flaw in his product. Once journalists started investigating, the whole story came out. His identity theft, his lies, his complete lack of scientific knowledge. He was exposed as a fraud without me ever having to explicitly call him a thief. The evidence spoke for itself. My parents still love us both equally because that's who they are. They just finally understand that Adrian is the performer and I'm the architect. They aren't mad at him, but they don't trust him with anything more complicated than a toaster anymore. I'm back in my lab now, working on something new and even more revolutionary. Adrian is back to auditioning for commercials and small roles. He still has my face, perfectly identical down to every feature, but he'll never have my nose, my knowledge, my years of training and expertise. In this industry, the face might get you in the door, but the science keeps you in the room. And Adrian just learned that lesson the hardest way possible.